and he keeps on keeping me. I say hallelujah to him this morning because his grace and mercy have brought me this far, and his grace and mercy will continue to lead me on. I say hallelujah to him this morning because he hasn't forgotten me. I say hallelujah to him this morning because he is my help, and all my help comes from the Lord. I say hallelujah to him this morning because he shedded his blood on the cross for me, and he didn't have to do it, but he did. So I say hallelujah to him this morning because all my sins are forgiven and all my yesterdays are gone. Hallelujah. So hallelujah, Jesus. So say hallelujah to him today, saints. Hallelujah. 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 Anyhow, Lord, that when trouble comes my way, I will lift my hands to you and say, hallelujah. Anyhow. Hallelujah, Lord. Thank you, Lord. Hallelujah. For you are a good God. Yes, he is. Praise you, Jesus. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. So at this time, we're going to do our vision and our mission. So could we stand, please? Our vision is to be the best trained and evangelistic ministry in the world. Our mission is for the purpose of glorifying the name of Jesus through worship, Christian discipline, and the proclaiming of the gospel. What kind of place is it? A progressive and prosperous place. A place of worship to our God. A place of Christian a place of community and international outreach. A place exploding in growth. And what did Jesus say in John 12:32? And if I be lifted up from the earth, will draw all men unto me. So what are we going to do today? Hallelujah. Lift them up. Lift them up. Lift Jesus up. We'll lift him up today, Lord. Yes, Lord. Hallelujah, in Jesus' name. At this time, we're going to have our praise team.
Hallelujah. Hallelujah.
We're going to get ready to praise the Lord. Hallelujah.
Praise the Lord this morning to bless his name. Come and clap and dance with us this morning. And come and praise the Lord with me.
about His goodness. Think about His love. Yes. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. Yes, Lord. And the scripture says in Philippians 2:8, and being found, talking about Jesus, in appearance as a man, He humbled Himself and became obedient to the point of death, even the death of the cross. This is what He did for us. Therefore, God also has highly exalted Him and given Him a name above all names, that at the name of Jesus, come on, y'all. I said at the name of Jesus. Not my name, not your name, not a denomination's name, but at the name of Jesus. Every knee bow. Every tongue. You don't have nothing to say, just confess. Hallelujah. That He's Lord. Those in heaven, those in the earth, those under the earth, bowing down. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. And so we do honor you, Jesus. You're our King. You're the master of everything. In you we live and move, and have our being. We rededicate ourselves. Come on and do it. Do it today. We rededicate ourselves to you. Into your hands we commit our lives. We commit our fears and our doubts. We commit our limitations and temporalness to your eternal value and worth. We surrender all to thee, our blessed Savior, Jesus. We surrender all. So now we give to you our marriages. Come on, do it. We give to you our singlehood. We give to you our children. Do it. Come on, do it. Tell them. We give to you our grandchildren, our greats. We give to you, Lord God, our neighborhoods and our cities, our government, our nation. It belongs to you. And we again on the platter of our petition. We give it and them to you right now. Oh, and by the way, we also give to you our fears. The fear of man, the fear of discovery, the fear of our future, the fear of the unknown. We give that to you today also. All to thee, our blessed Savior. Even as we humble ourselves under the mighty hand of God, that you may exalt us now in due time. You're beautiful in our sight, Lord. And you're a wonder in our soul. We love you today. Would you tell them that? Would you tell them in your own way? Would you tell them that you love Him today? Come on and do it now. In your own special way, just tell them how much you love Him. And all the things that He has done. And the things that He is about to do. Would you give thanks to Him today? Come on. It doesn't matter if somebody hears you just in your way. Would you just whisper that to Him? Begin to count your blessings now. Name them right now before Him. Every little and great thing that He has done, recite it before Him now and thank Him for being a good God. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name. The name, no music.
The name of Jesus Christ.
All over the room. You should know the song by now.
What a beautiful name it is.
There's none to compare.
Nothing compares to this.
What a beautiful.
What a beautiful name it is.
The name.
The name of Jesus.
What a powerful name, everybody. What a powerful name it is. Oh my. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ our King. What a powerful Savior.
What a powerful name it is.
My. Nothing compares to this. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a powerful name. What a powerful name. Hallelujah. Give God some praise today as you receive it. His body is coming. We declare the power of the name of Jesus. Say, I declare the power of the name of Jesus. Say, I declare the power of the name of Jesus. You know, we lived in a society, we're living in a society, past, present, and we trust the power of Jesus supersedes all of the powers. But in growing up, I witnessed green power, black power, white power, church power. Amen. My family power, they say Glenn power, we Glens, you know how y'all say what y'all say. But the power that lies exclusively, come on y'all, come on y'all, in the name of Jesus, greater than any other power, stronger than any might of man. So I declare in this house, I declare over you, those here and not here, I declare the power of Jesus. I declare the power of Jesus on our mind, the power of Jesus in our bodies. The power of Jesus in our pockets. The power of Jesus in our talking, in our walking, in our living. So we don't struggle no more. We're above and not beneath. With the head and not the tail. The power of Jesus' name. That when things are less, lower, and ridiculous, we begin to declare the name of Jesus over that situation, over that circumstance, over that obstacle. Come on, talk to me. Over that matter, over that issue, over that person. Oh, I declare, say I declare the power of the name of Jesus. And when sometimes I'm weak, you might say, I want to cross over on the other side. We're not talking about, the afterlife, but you're crossing over on some territory you don't belong. And somebody want to cross over on your territory. We have the power of the blood. I'm done after this, but let me tell you, the old schoolers, the folk in the church of old, Mother Baker, y'all know, they would plead the blood of Jesus. Someone may be shaking their hand like this over you, or over the blood. Anybody remember that? The blood of Jesus. We're too sophisticated to talk about the blood. That's gruesome. Well, listen, all the messy shows you've seen with blood splattered all over the place. Don't talk to me about your, queasy stomach and mind concerning blood. The blood of Jesus. Say it, the blood of Jesus. Scripture says in Revelation that we overcome the devil. We overcome the systems of this world by the blood of Jesus. Yes. And by our testimony. And we do it with such vigor and passion, we don't even love our life when we do it. Bring it on. That's what I say.
Yes.
Because you're going to find out that we are greater than you. Well, the scripture says, greater is he that's in me than he that's in the world. Come on, give God some praise.
Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. In the name of Jesus, the sweetest name I know.
All right.
When you can't call nobody else, you can't call nothing else, Jesus' name is always there waiting on you to say, Jesus. Just Jesus. Hallelujah. Sometimes that's all I can say.
Come on.
I can't find the other words, but I can always say Jesus. Hallelujah. The sweetest name I know. Powerful name. Hallelujah. Thank you, Lord. Hallelujah. So at this time, we're going to get ready for our word ministry, the operation of the gifts of the Spirit. Ministers, you know what you supposed to be doing. But other than that, if there's anyone here that haven't done this before, and you believe that you heard something this morning for this ministry, you could write it down, send it up here to the pulpit so that it can be judged. And if it's not given out today, it does not mean that you didn't hear it. It just may mean that it's not for this time, okay? So ministers, whoever heard a word, you can come up.
Share something that God has been putting on my heart during the last few months. It's like every time I turn around, something is happening and I'm going through something else. And I've been concentrating on Philippians 4:13 and 19, and it says, I can do all things through Christ, which strengthens me. But my God shall supply all my needs according to his riches and glory. And as we were singing, what a beautiful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. I saw myself taking off an old garment, and if I needed strength for that time, I would put on the strength of God. If I needed encouragement, I will put on God's cloak of encouragement. I will put on God's cloak of comfort. Whatever you are going through, whatever you need, take off that cloak and put on the cloak of God.
God has been dealing with me with, well, and it's, for the body too, about strongholds. And he was downloading some things to me about strongholds that, stronghold is something that keeps you from the truth, that will block the truth from getting to where it needs to get to, which is your heart and your soul. But when the truth comes, if you find yourself daydreaming, or thinking about something else, it's a stronghold in your life. And I'm guilty of it. But in 2 Corinthians 10:4 says, the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty through God to the pulling down of strongholds. The weapons through God is the truth. The truth is so powerful that's what the enemy's done to the church, to the world. We're believing lies and not the truth. The truth of your identity is the most important thing of who you are. But the truth of everything that's been given to you through the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ is the most powerful truth that your heart will ever understand. But, so I just wanted to keep the body of Christ aware that we have the truth to cast down arguments and philosophies and the way we were brought up through the power of the truth that's in Christ Jesus.
That song, what a beautiful name it is. I thought about it. We could call on Jesus for anything. All our help is in Him. When troubles come and things go bad for us in life, we could call on the name of Jesus. He's our true friend. He calls us friend. Amen. We could call on Him for all our help, because all our help comes from the Lord. Amen. And we can also give up all for Him. God said, give up all for me. Give up all for me. I just kept hearing the Lord say, give up all for me. I am the Savior of the world. I am the Savior of the world.
As the song was being sung, calling on the name of Jesus, I heard God say that not only have you heard it naturally, but you've heard it in your heart. You've heard it spiritually. And God has released a strategy for whatever you are going through. When you're calling on His name, He has released unto you what to do and how to overcome whatever trouble is in your life. Because there is no name under heaven which men can be saved but by the name of Jesus.
I just heard it while you all was up talking. I heard saying, let me be your GPS. Those that use the GPS, you know what it is. So God is saying, let Him be your GPS. Let Him lead you. Let Him guide you. Let Him reroute you when you get off on the wrong track. Let Him be your GPS. At this time, we're going to have our announcements.
Before she gets the announcement, let me just say that what's not on the announcement is the food giveaway. That's going to be next Wednesday, right here at 12 noon. We normally have our Bible study at 10, and so somewhere around 11, we'll get ready for people who will be coming. You're more than welcome to the food. It's free. All you need is a valid driver's license or Michigan ID, and so that we can get your information. And because the food bank wants a tracking of those who have received the food. So again, the food is free. All you need is your ID. If you can't make it, again, this is an opportunity for others to come and receive what they do not have. That's in food form. We don't know what kind of food they will be giving us, but whatever is on the truck, on pallets, that's brought to us, that's what we will serve. So again, that's this Wednesday at 12 noon. Also, you will hear the announcement about night service. I am appealing to all of our servants to be ready tonight as well. We want you here before the guest comes, and so let's be here at 6 p.m. All right, the service starts at 6:30. We have people coming from Detroit that will be here, from Monroe, Michigan, and from Lansing, from Port Saginaw, Bay City, Midland, Flint area, etc. So we have a regional opportunity for them to come and see the supernatural in action. And so let's be ready for our guests when they come. All right? And so we just ask you to be on post and be ready. You know how we do it. If it's not done in excellence, we're not going to do it. And so, of course, we expect you on post and ready for it. Thank you very much.
Praise the Lord. Ministry of Love Conference will be taking place July 18th and 19th at 7 p.m. at the New Christ Community Church. Supernatural Sunday tonight at 6:30 p.m. Invite others. Helps Ministry Training will be July 20th at 11 a.m. Assembly Business Meeting Sunday, July 14th, following service. Fasting and prayer every Wednesday at 6 p.m. United Prayer. Tell someone about Jesus and invite them to church. Do we have any first-time visitors today? Praise the Lord. Will you please stand and give us your name, church home, please? Welcome, Tamiko. Glad to have you. Amen. Who invited you? Joy. Okay, praise God. We have and this is a new month, so everyone with a July birthday or anniversary, please stand. Amen. We are in the hands of the Lord. Anniversary. No, stand up. Come on. Whoa, come on, stand up. Anniversary. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Happy anniversary to you. Congratulations. How many years? 20? 30. 30? Whoa! Amen. Amen. We're back in the hands of the pulpit.
Yesterday was Sister Bertha's oldest brother's funeral in Flint. They were having a family reunion and her brother died. This was her oldest. He was 75. Apostle did go to the service yesterday at Ebenezer Church in Flint. But it was really quick, so we have to get together, ladies, and take some food down to Bertha's house and get cards and be a blessing to her. You know, you see all the families not here this morning because their family reunion and their funeral yesterday. So let's make sure we take care of that. Talk to me after service, we'll get cards, and we'll make sure we coordinate taking the food down to Flint, okay?
Praise the Lord.
Praise the Lord.
It's offering time. Hallelujah. 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 Yes, Lord. I just keep hearing that. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Heard it this morning. Hallelujah. Praise the Lord. If you need an envelope, you can raise your hands and the ushers will assist you. If you we have the point of sale today, so if you need to use the point of sale, you will be able to use it. And remember to make sure you write your name and your amount and all on the envelope, so you will be able to receive. Turn it back. Okay. So everybody have your envelope? Are you Ready? Okay, at this time I'm going to read read our scripture. Okay, it's Malachi chapter 3, verse 8. Starting at verse 8, it says, "Would a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, wherein have we robbed thee? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation. Bring ye all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be meat in my house. And prove me now, herewith said the Lord of hosts, if I will not open you the windows of heaven, and pour you out a blessing, that there shall not be room enough to receive it. And I will rebuke the devourer for your sakes, and he shall not destroy the fruits of your ground. Neither shall your vine cast her first fruits be for the time in the field, said the Lord of hosts. And all nations shall call you blessed, for ye shall be a delightsome land, said the Lord of hosts." Could you stand, please? I'm sorry. Today is the pastor's offering, too, so. Okay, the basket for the pastor's offering is in Melissa's left hand. And I need to read the scripture, too, for the pastors, which is 1 Timothy chapter 5, verse 17 through 18, says, "Let the elders that rule well be counted worthy of double honor, especially they who labor in the word and doctrine. For the scripture says, thou shalt not muzzle the ox that treadeth out the corn, and the labor is worthy of his reward." Could we stand, please, when we read the offering affirmation? It says, "As we give our tithes and offering, we are believing you, Lord, for jobs and better jobs, raises and bonuses, benefits, sales and commissions, estates and inheritance, interest and income, rebates and returns, checks in the mail, healing and divine health, gifts and surprises, finding money, bills paid off, settlements, debts demolished, royalties received, scholarships and grants, contracts, money management, a hundredfold return, according to your word in Jesus' name." You can be led by the usher. Father, in Jesus' name, we bless this offering now. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for Psalm 30, Psalm 60, Psalm 112. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for those that desire to give, Lord God, but have not at this time. We thank you, Heavenly Father, because your word said, give and it shall be given back to us, good measure, pressed down, shaken together, running over shall man given to our bosom. So we thank you, Heavenly Father, for this offering now. We thank you, Lord God, that we would just go and, Heavenly Father, for the work of the ministry. We hear you praise in Jesus' name. Amen. So at this time, we're going to get ready for the word. The children can be dismissed at this time. We're getting ready for the word as Apostle is coming. With the word. Everybody say, Apostle James, thank you for giving us what we need. The word. In Jesus' name. Father, I lift up Apostle to you right now in Jesus' name. We thank you, Heavenly Father, for this gift, Heavenly Father, that you have given us, two gifts, Lord God, apostle and prophetess. So we thank you, Heavenly Father, right now in Jesus' name, Lord God, for the word that is coming, Heavenly Father, to help us, to clean us, Lord God, and to keep us in your path in the name of Jesus. We bless him, Lord God, and we thank you for strength for him right now in Jesus' name. Amen.
Hallelujah, saints. Hallelujah. This is an exciting day for one reason. And just to give you a heads up, we will have communion today, and following communion before our benediction, we have a ceremony to do. And that's the Knighton ceremony, 30 years. And they're going to revow themselves to each other. That's so precious and so special, is it not? Amen. Well, we thank God for the Lord being so good to us. And you know that God is so good. Can I get one or two witnesses? He's a good God. He's good. He's been good to us. I woke up this morning with my mind. No, I woke up this morning with my mind on Jesus. Thanking the Lord. I named how he blessed me, one blessing after the other. When we come into his presence, we do so with singing, into his gates with thanksgiving, into his courts with praise, and we bless his name. Because he's a good God. Is he not? Yes. Yeah, and he's all the time good. You may not understand him, but he's good still the same. So, again, I'm just honoring our Father today. I am grateful that one day he chose this little fellow in October 1976 who had great potential and value, but had low self-esteem and struggled with his image, his identity, purposeless, and even doubted the words that proceeded out of his mouth. I have a witness right here. But when he filled me with the Holy Spirit, he began to slowly, as I allowed him to change me, I began to thank God. Why? I don't know how, but you did it. You wanted me to get up and speak on your behalf. Incredible to me. Absolutely incredible. So whatever charisma you think I have, whatever degree of intelligence or ability to vocalize and illustrate and expound and elaborate on God's word, you're looking at a man draped in the Holy Ghost. You take the Holy Spirit from me, I start stuttering again. I start questioning, I look at you like, did you understand what I just said? Because I didn't understand what I said to you. True story, that's true. I want you to give thanks today. Even right now. You don't have to do it out loud, but in your mind. I want you to think about right now what you're grateful for. And I want you in your mind right now, and those who are able to give God some thanks. I want you to spend time to do that right now, 30 seconds. Amen, church. He didn't have to do it, but he did. He didn't have to save you. He didn't have to fill you. He didn't have to deliver you. He didn't have to keep you. Keep you sound. Some of y'all would have lost your mind long time ago. Lost your mind into man. We still be visiting you today. Things that we go through, and God has kept us. Hallelujah. Well, I want to talk about it hasn't changed since the last time I spoke to you on it, and that is on the gifts of the Holy Spirit. How important it is that we operate in the gifts of the Spirit. Now, we operate in the talents, we operate in the vocation, we operate in the various natural channels of life that life has afforded us as we matriculated through life and through school. And we readily, at hand, at will, operate through those gifts and talents naturally. How much more spiritually? How much more spiritually? It must be more. And it has nothing to do with how you feel. Oh, if you could only know. When my wife and I get up here, you don't know if we're sick, you don't know if we struggled to get here. You don't know any of that. All you know is that we're here and we're doing what we're called to do. That's what you know. But you don't know the inside scoop. So, being supernatural has nothing to do with our feelings, how you feel. It has to do with your obedience and your faith. And this is where we need to repent. For we're not believing God enough for Him to use us. And when He desires to do so, we question if it's He that is prompting us to say, to operate in some gift of the Spirit. Shame on us, because we should have been flowing in the gifts of the Spirit long time ago. How many years have you been saved? 10, 15, 20 years? I haven't in the most wonderful opportunity to flow in the gifts when 2 or 3 are gathered together and He's in the midst of us. We don't flow. Or we regulate ourselves, or relegate, ourselves to 1 or 2 people flowing for all of us. Or we fear and there's no faith. God is not coming back for you. Hear me well. If you're not obedient to the Spirit in flowing in His precious Ruach HaKodesh Spirit, He ain't coming back for you. Now, hopefully that woke you up. Because the Scripture says He's coming for a church without spot or wrinkle. Ephesians chapter 5. Blemish, no such thing. In other words, we're pure, we're undefiled. There is no moral blemish about us. We operate in moral excellence according to Scripture and in the power of the Holy Ghost. He's not coming back for something that doesn't look like Him. He's coming back for His own. Well, if He's coming back for His own, He's coming back for His own spiritual DNA-ness. He's coming back for that group. He's coming back for that family. Not something that doesn't look like Him. Something that doesn't operate like Him. We got to repent. Because there's only 2 ways to be. Either you're in the Spirit or you're in the flesh. There's only 2 ways. I haven't done anything wrong. Our disobedience is wrong. You have no problem obeying anger. You have no problem obeying jealousy. You have no problem obeying bitterness. You have no problem obeying your mess. Have no problem. I mean, you cough it up, you do it, you flow by rote because you've been doing it for years. Now when the Spirit wants to operate, you're questioning that. You sure don't question your anger. Could you let me know what is that? I don't know if that's anger or not. Oh no, because you're proficient at it. And that's just one aspect of the flesh. This is serious. I know you might think there's a flavor of lightness about this. There's nothing light about this at all. This is very serious. I have issue with anyone here and anyone that I know, especially pastors and those in leadership, that does not allow the Holy Spirit. And let me just make something very plain to you. If I'm requiring you to flow in the gifts of the Spirit, how much more me? How much more profit? You understand? I'm going to tell you now, you ain't going to outdo me. This is going to be the best competition you've ever been in. Paul said in 1 Corinthians chapter 14, he says you must all prophesy. He said you must all speak in tongues. He says I speak in tongues more than all of you. He says, I prophesy more than all of them. Hallelujah. I'm getting the chills. I don't know why. I think it's that hair. Turn that hair down. There's nothing spiritual about that hair right now. Turn it down. You're messing with my sweat of the Spirit here. Y'all don't believe that, do you? You don't believe that the Holy Spirit is all about condensation in your life. You ain't sweating, you ain't got the Spirit. No, I'm just something working in you. Something working in you. Y'all listen to me. Listen very closely. I'm serious. I'm very serious about this. This must be the passion of the apostolic in it. We got some room to grow here. We have to be more spiritual than we are natural. Wow, I want you to think about that for a minute because you're saying, now come on now, you're really pushing the envelope. Yeah, somebody needs to push you somewhere because you ain't doing nothing. I'm just talking generally. I'm not talking to you specifically. And so it's time out, my friends, for us to allow our natural, our flesh, to allow us to get in the way of what God wants to do. It's okay. It's okay, Apostle, because we have anointed leaders and we got some ministers here. You saw them today. They really are touched by the Spirit and moved by the Spirit. You don't need me. That's like somebody said, you don't need my vote. Every vote counts. Every link in the chain counts. And if you could imagine Center of Attraction Outreach being this long chain connected together by links, every link is significant and important because we are as strong as our weakest link. You understand me now? Therefore, every link must function. Therefore, every person is significant. Now, I understand in certain churches you can't flow. There's no excuse you're not flowing here in the gifts of the Spirit. God serves the universe, his light, according to Genesis 1. Jesus serves the world, his life, according to John 1. The Holy Spirit serves the church, his power, in Acts 1 and 8. And the church, or the body of Christ, is a many-membered body with various functions, as the natural body has functions and systems, i.e. respiratory, musculocellular, digestive, brain, heart, kidneys, liver, stomach, thyroid, etc. So the body of Christ functions with a system of light, a life system, a power system that's supernatural. As the natural body systems must function independently and interdependently, how much more the supernatural body of Christ. Now you are the body of Christ and members individually, Paul says in 1 Corinthians 12 and 27. We exist for a reason. For as we have many members in one body, but all the members do not have the same function, so we being many are one body in Christ and individually members of one another. So now, not only do we exist for a reason, we coexist also for a reason. Say with me, I am a member of the body of Christ. I have a function. And I am to serve with that gifted function. So my church can be comforted, encouraged, and built up. I am that gifted servant. With that in mind, we go now to the Holy Spirit's gifts. We talked to you before about this simple system for organizing these supernatural gifts, and they are the vocal gifts. And we're going to talk directly about the vocal gifts today. Under the vocal gifts are tongues, interpretation of tongues, and prophecy. Revelation gifts, amen. We're not going to go there yet, Tracy. Revelation gives the word of knowledge, the word of wisdom, discerning of spirits. Then we have the power gifts, which is the gift of faith, the working of miracles, the gifts of healing. We're going to talk today about the vocal gifts, spend a little time on that, a little teaching on that, and because we really kind of glossed over this last time, and so we're going to delve a little deeper into these gifts, and we begin today with the vocal gifts. 1 Corinthians chapter 12, we're going to start at verse 7, although I'm going to read quickly starting at verse 1. Now concerning spiritual gifts, brethren, I do not want you to be ignorant. Okay, so we ought not here be ignorant concerning spiritual gifts. What is that? What we should know was operating, and then we should know if we are a candidate to operate in the gifts. You know that you were Gentiles carried away to these dumb idols, meaning, these wooden stone idols, etc., that couldn't speak and couldn't hear, but they, these Gentiles, they worship these idols. Therefore, I make known to you that no one speaking by the Spirit of God calls Jesus accursed, and no one can say that Jesus is Lord except by the Holy Spirit. There are diversities of gifts, but it's the same Spirit. It's not different spirits, same Spirit. Difference of ministries, same Lord. And there are diversities of activities, but it is the same God who works all in all. But the manifestation of the Spirit is given to each one for the profit of all. And that means profit there means benefit of all. Verse 8, for to one is given the word of wisdom through the Spirit, to another word of knowledge through the same Spirit, to another faith by the same Spirit, to another gifts of healings by the same Spirit, to another the working of miracles, to another prophecy, to another discerning of tongues, to another the interpretation of tongues. But one and the same Spirit works all these things, distributing to each one individually as he wills. Okay? All right. We're going to stop right there, and let's begin with the vocal gifts. Now, the vocal gifts, primarily manifested, you don't have to say that, primarily manifested by saying something. So, how is the Lord manifesting here? He's manifesting by us being used by the Holy Spirit to manifest that gift. Now, look at me for a moment. If you are not baptized or infilled with the Holy Spirit, the Holy Spirit's gifts will not operate through you. Okay? Now, I don't have time to go through it all. According to John chapter 3, various scriptures there. That which is born of flesh is flesh, that which is born of spirit is spirit. Then you go to the Titus account, other associated scriptures. You'll discover that the Holy Spirit is a change agent that comes in and changes you, delivers you out of darkness into the marvelous light of his dear Son, the Father's Son, which is Jesus Christ. So the Holy Spirit has come for the work of redemption, salvation, and to bring the light of Christ in your life. But then there's a subsequent act, and that act is being filled, infilled, baptized. I don't care what terminology you use, by or with the Holy Spirit. Now, Jesus talks about this, Matthew 3:11 says, I'm the baptizer. He also promises his disciples and those that would ever be his disciples, Acts 1:8, it starts right there, okay, that he says to his immediate disciples that you wait in the upper room, and when the Holy Spirit comes, he's going to endue you, empower you. You're going to be my witnesses in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and unto the uttermost parts of the earth. And then we find it actually taking place in Acts 2, verses 1, 2, 3, and 4. Okay, and then Peter is used by the Holy Spirit and says, now, this is that which was spoken according to Joel 2:28, etc. And then he says some things that begins to bring all disciples in. He says, all who will believe will take on this gift if you believe. And you as well can be filled with the Holy Spirit, speaking within or with other tongues as the Spirit gives utterance. That is the outward sign of an inner infilling. Something happened to you that we didn't see happen. It happened inside of you, and now outside I'm witnessing what took place inside of you. Now, that you have the Holy Spirit in you, according to Acts 1:8 and the associated scriptures in Acts account. So now, the gifts will begin to operate through the Holy Spirit in you. Okay? All right? So you got to be baptized with the Holy Spirit. All right? You got to be baptized in the Holy Spirit. You got to be filled with the Holy Spirit. Don't leave this place today without being prayed for to receive the baptism of the Holy Spirit so you can have some supernatural power. Some supernatural power. Some supernatural power. Hallelujah. Hallelujah. Amen. The Holy Spirit wants to move. The Holy Spirit wants to groove. The Holy Spirit wants to manifest. The Holy Spirit wants to live. He all bottled up in you. He wants to live. He wants to express himself. He doesn't do it through an animal. He doesn't do it through some inanimate object. He doesn't do it through nature. The only entity, the only element, the only identity of this earth is humanity. Holy Spirit doesn't fill a tree. Holy Spirit doesn't fill and possess your dog, your cat. Although you still believe that all dogs go to heaven, but the Holy Spirit does not come in that kind of soul. But that which has been redeemed by the blood, sometimes you got to say these things so people think crazy stuff. Those redeemed by the blood, those that are called after his image. Amen. Amen. So now, here we are, and Paul says here that all of these gifts are operated by the self-same Spirit. Okay, I said I'm going to teach here in a minute, so give me about 10 or 12 more minutes. And we begin by the vocal gifts, tongues. Tongues, say that, tongues. 1 Corinthians chapter 14. Can we go there? 1 Corinthians chapter 14. And I'm going to start at verse 6 and read from 6 to 8. But now, brethren, if I come to you speaking with tongues, what shall I profit you unless I speak to you either by revelation, by knowledge, by prophecy, sign, or by teaching? Look at me for a moment. Every minister, when he or she ministers to you, should minister out of those four. Got that? If that minister is not ministering through a revelation, or by some spiritual knowledge, or by prophesying to you, or by doctrine. Look at me for a moment, because all four are edifying. All four of them build you up. Don't come with me with jokes. Come with me with something silly you did last night and last week, and we all laugh. Give me something that's going to edify me, build me up, get me on my way, encourage me along the way. Because I got to go out and deal with these demons when I leave this place. That was a freebie. I just thought I'd give it. Verse 7. If you can move quickly, I won't put it on my phone. Verse 7. And even things without life, given sound, whether pipe or harp, except they have a distinction in the sounds. How shall it be known what is pipe or harp? Verse 8. For if the trumpet give an uncertain sound, who shall prepare himself to the battle? All right, so you can't just give a tongue. Now, this tongue, according to 1 Corinthians 13, Paul said, is a tongue of men or of angels. Okay, now, we know that the first tongue, according to the disciples in the upper room, they all spoke in other tongues, and the Spirit gave them utterance. They did not speak tongues of angels. Okay? Right, that doesn't mean that it was bad, but they spoke the tongues of ethnicity and of people groups. Because they responded, they're giving glory to God in my tongue. These are Galileans, they're dumb people. How did he go to school to learn my language? Got it? So, when the Holy Spirit fills us, there could be two kinds of tongues operating, or one or the other. Tongues of men. All right? Or tongues of angels, which means a heavenly language. All right? That means God is operating through you, but there's a sound, Paul said, is happening. What are they saying? What's the goal here? Look at me for a moment. What's the goal? When we come together, the goal is to learn. The goal is to be edified. The goal is to be understood. Don't be, I'm speaking in tongues. All right, that was nice, and you got all excited and sweaty over it. But that didn't do anything for me. I'm happy for you. Now, there is a worship tongue, all right, where we all exercise. It all goes up to God. God may drop something in your spirit personally. That's it, period. Don't belong to anyone else. It's not a public tongue. All right, meaning a gifted tongue. Sometimes Prophet Sherry operates in tongues. We're done worshiping in tongues. So it comes down, she's still forceful with the tongue. I know that's the gift in operation. Now, after the gift is operated, somebody has to give an interpretation, because that's not helping out one of us. Because Paul said, now we read earlier, when I come, it's going to either be a revelation, a doctrine, it's going to be prophesied, because the purpose of the vocality, there's such a term, of the ministry is for someone to be assisted and helped. So now there has to be someone to interpret what Sherry just spoke supernaturally. And we move to the next one on that one, but we won't right now. Let's go to verse 22. 1 Corinthians 14:22. Wherefore, tongues are for a sign, not to them that believe, but to them that believe not. But prophecy, or prophesying, serve not for them that believe not, but for them which believe. Keep reading. All right, we're going all the way to 28, so here we go. If therefore the whole church be come together into one place and all speak with tongues, and there come in those that are unlearned or unbelievers, will they not say, all y'all crazy, excuse me, ye are mad? But if all prophesy, and there come in one that believeth not, or one unlearned, he is convinced of all, because he is judged of all. You understand? So prophecy, if I give a general prophecy right now, it may not be for everyone, but here comes a person that don't understand anything, coming to church, they're visiting, and I'm prophesying something, and they looking at me strange like, how did he know I was going through that? I didn't know. But now your faith is risen, and now you understand God is of truth. And hopefully prophecy and prophesying is drawing you closer. Verse 26. How is it then, brethren, when you come together, every one of you then have a psalm, a doctrine, a tongue, that's a song. I have a revelation. I have an interpretation. Here it is. Let all things be done unto edifying. Where we get the word edifice, which means building. In other words, you being built up. Verse 27. If any man speak in an unknown tongue, let it be by 2, or by most by 3, and that by course, and let one interpret the 2 or the 3 speaking in the gift of tongue. We're not talking about worship tongue. All right. Hold it a minute. Hold it. Praise team. Okay. We got to interpret these tongues here. No. That's crazy stuff, ain't it? Isn't that crazy? Because we have to understand this, because some people don't. Okay. That's the tongue of worship. When I say, come on, y'all, let's pray in the Holy Ghost. I'm not going to prophesy, give interpretation, rather, on all these tongues that are all 40, 50, or 60. You see what I'm saying? Not going to happen. Not necessary. Because that's private between you and God. Got it? You don't need interpretation for that. Amen? Amen. Let me just say before I forget, we're talking interpretation, not translation. Translation is word by word. Okay? All right. So you can give a long tongue and the interpretation is one sentence. Or vice versa. You give a tongue, and somebody give a long interpretation what that means, right? And the other person said, now come on, you really boasting here on yourself. He didn't say all that. It's the Lord's interpretation of what's being said. Amen. Why is all of this needful? We're in class now. For what? Edification. Everything is for edification, built up. I need to learn something. And God will use these various gifts to build his body up, his church up, and the gates of hell will not prevail. Hallelujah, saints. Hallelujah. So, tongues is the supernatural utterance in the language never learned and usually not understood by the speaker or listener. Now, in Mark 9:23, every gift is operated by faith. Say by faith. By faith. All right, so you don't go into your supernatural exercise room, start exercising, building yourself up naturally to do something supernatural. Okay? Yeah, I know it's funny, but okay. All right. And so you don't, get into some kind of zone, no, because that's still man-made, manufactured. Okay? You pray in the Holy Ghost. Because that, according to Jude, says you will do something. What is that? Praying in the Holy Spirit, you will what? Build yourself up in faith. Amen. 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 So now when you come to the house of the Lord, all of a sudden the gift begins to well up in you. You feel it. You sense it. You know it. Okay? You know this is not you. Ooh, boy. Okay, what do I do with this? Well, you believe God and allow it to flow. Now, Paul talked about water. Let me talk about that. Okay? I gave you the little funny story of me, interrupting Pastor Aldridge because I had something to say. It was a word of prophecy, but wrong timing. So, Paul said in the earlier verses, he says that with prophecy as well. The vocal gifts get people more in trouble than not. Okay? And so, you're giving a tongue right now. while I'm preaching. God is not a God of confusion. Okay? So you have to learn when to allow that gift to flow. Now, I'm not saying God won't ever interrupt, but it seems like every time I'm up here, you interrupted me. That ain't God. And I'm going to let you know that too. Amen. You're talking to Leon, your husband, and let's say, a little Cliff at that time come up. Mom, hey, wait until we're done talking. All right? Order. Somebody say order. So let it happen by course. Okay, here's a tongue. All right? Now you're in your tongue now. Okay? So the next person has a tongue. Another person has a tongue. And Paul said to let one interpret. Let's have some order. Okay? Because the Corinthians were very pneumaticus. They were very spiritual. So you had people speaking in tongues over here, other folks prophesying, they were just, the Spirit was full, and they just allowed the Spirit to happen. And so he would come into the service and say, my goodness, ain't nobody getting helped here. Folks speaking in tongues over here, other folks prophesying, other people laying hands saying, I got to give the healing. My hand's on fire. My hand's on fire. So as an apostle, he came in and said, hold it now, let's have some order. If you're going to have a tongue, amen, let's concentrate on what the Spirit is doing. Don't y'all be prophesying over here and accept somebody in the lobby or whatever. Amen. Don't do that here. I'll shut you down. Don't do it. Don't do it. Okay. Amen. We're ministering here. You're out there in the hallway. Now you laid hands on somebody. Now they flopped in the lobby's floor. And you got other people in the back row looking around, seeing what's happening. And they're going out there to the lobby. They're praying. We got a demon. We got to cast that demon out. Bring the demon person here. There is protocol everywhere in life. I know you think you're free. Toby be free. I know you think you're free. You're not as free as you think. There is order and protocol in every system and in every area and arena of life. Can I get an amen, somebody? You know I'm right. So why do you think you come to church, say and do anything you want to do? You cannot and will not hear. And we will with love guide you along the way. And so, interpretation of those tongues, when a person supernaturally receives the meaning of an utterance in tongues. Let's go to 1 Corinthians chapter 14, verse 5. How are we with the PowerPoint? I don't know where we are with that now. But 1 Corinthians 14 and 5, this is what it says. I would that ye all spake with tongues, but rather that you prophesy, for greater is he that prophesied than he that speaketh in tongues, except there be an interpreter of that tongue. Why did Paul just say that? Let me see if I can catch some of y'all students on this. Why did he say that? Why did he say prophecy is greater than tongues? What? Don't understand it? Okay. What else? What did you? So it can be understood. Tell me, how is tongues understood? By an interpreter. All right. So why is prophecy then greater than tongues? No, the tongue ain't already interpreted. Prophecy has an understanding already in it. Okay, that's correct. It takes two people for the tongue operation. It only takes one person to prophesy. Although we teach here, if you're bad enough to give a tongue, you better interpret what you just said. And then people fake start rising up and they're, oh, okay, apostle and prophet. Yeah, you won't give a tongue? Then we're waiting on you to interpret. Let that faith keep on flowing. Amen, y'all. Amen. Now, we're not in mechanic class or science class or anything like that. But when you go to those classes, you learn more and you begin to operate its principles. That's why when you come to the houses of God, you got to learn how to operate supernaturally. Amen. verse 13 and 15. Give me 5 minutes. I wish I could get deeper. Come on. Wherefore let him that speaketh in an unknown tongue pray that he may interpret. There you go, prophet. It's right there. Okay. Yeah, amen. She likes to interpret my tongue too.
I can.
Yeah, I know. All right, so now hold your tongue. Let the Lord talk to you. That was a good comeback. So you what? You pray in an unknown tongue. Go back to that. You pray. Well, okay. Pray then that you interpret. Okay. Now I was talking about publicly. Actually, Paul is talking about private here right now. So you're in prayer, and all of a sudden a tongue comes, and you know it's a gift. Pray that you can interpret your own tongue. And we won't go into that. I'll teach on that later, because there are times in my devotion that I'm worshiping or I'm talking to God. He literally prophesies through me for me. Anybody ever witnessed that before? I know that sounds a little different. Yeah. And the same happens with tongues. All right, let's move on. It is not a translation, but an interpretation. Okay? And I alluded to that before. Again, this gift must operate by faith. And then lastly, let's talk about prophecy. Prophecy is supernatural utterance in a known language that speaks for God and is both spontaneous and timely. I'm not saying that you can't ever have a word before. Okay? And what I have to do, because I'm not as gifted as you are, if I'm going somewhere, if my place, my venue that I'm going to, I may be speaking at, or I am up front, I have to do something, or it is family related, etc. I am praying, Lord, drop something in my heart. I many times have to write it down. Okay? Because the Lord is very wordy with me at times. So I want to make sure that I got exactly what he said. I write it down. All right? It is spontaneous at that moment, because while I'm seeking the Lord or in prayer, or I might be driving, he drops it in very spontaneously because I wasn't expecting it to come. And I have to write it down and wait the time that I go to that venue, and the time at that venue when it can be released. Okay? Amen? But, as a rule, it is spontaneous. Now, prophecy, like the other gifts, must operate by faith, or it will then operate by your flesh. Not that the Spirit of God is operating, but your flesh is. You do know that after you've been in a spiritual environment, you can mimic that. You do realize that. Hello? There are people talking in tongues, they ain't got no Holy Ghost at all. I don't know what kind of tongue that is. Yabba dabba do. Yabba dabba do. Ya 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 ya. Yabba dabba do. Folk fall in spirit. Yabba dabba. Talking in tongues. All they talking about is Jesus. But on a more serious note, I'm not saying for us to be suspicious. That's not the Spirit of God. But we are to, judge everything around us. Discern everything around us. Everything that looks spiritual ain't spiritual. That's what I'm talking about. Amen. Because demons can talk in tongues. I just thought I'd throw that out. It's called a familiar spirit. They take on the religious spirit and they begin to mimic that in a person. You think they're full of spirit, they're not full of spirit at all. When they come for prayer, I know if they're in the spirit or not. I know if this is, and they go out and when the Holy Ghost knocking them out, they fail now. I just look at it. I just, Lord, deal with it. Amen. So it's important that we understand that we are a prophetic nation here. We are prophetic people. We believe in the Holy Spirit vocalizing himself. And we believe that prophets and prophetesses are budding here and being trained here because God is still speaking. And he's still saying something. Whoever has a listening ear needs to hear what the Holy Ghost is saying. So, prophecy as a vocal gift is the gift of the Holy Spirit. This is not the office of a prophet. Because the office of a prophet gets into rebukes and order and direction and guidance and such like. Okay, the gift of prophecy stays within the confines of comfort, edification, and also building you up. Okay, and so it's important that one realizes that, and because you're flowing in this gift, again, doesn't mean that you are a prophet. It takes the discerning or the discriminating ability of Christ to determine if he desires you to be one or not. 1 Corinthians 14, I'm done with this. Verses 3 and 4, prophecy. Let's get that on the screen. Let's move here quickly and then I'll be done. A few biblical examples of this gift of prophecy. 1 Corinthians 14 and 3. But he that prophesies speaketh unto men to edification. There it is. To exhort them and to comfort them. Verse 4 says, he that speaketh in an unknown tongue edifies himself. He that prophesies edifies or builds the entire church up. It's a beautiful thing. Verse 24 and 25. 24 and 25. It says the following. But if all prophecy or prophesy, and there come in one that believeth not, or one unlearned, he is convinced of all, he is judged of all. The next verse, 25, says, and thus are the secrets of his heart made manifest, so falling down to his face, he will worship God and report that God is in you of truth. Verse 29, and then we're going to go all the way to 33, and then one other verse of scripture, we're done. Let the prophet speak 2 or 3, and let the other judge. So again, here's another chorus, right? 1, okay, when you're done, then the other person, the other prophet can prophesy. Let the senior prophet judge that. Okay? Not everyone judging. He doesn't mean that. He doesn't mean fledglings judging. He's not meaning that. You got to study this. These are senior people doing so. Let's continue on. Verse 30, please. Verse 30 says, verse 30, okay. If anything be revealed to another that sitteth by, then let the first hold his peace. 31 says, for ye may all prophesy one by one, that all may learn, and all may be comforted. He's still talking about order, right? Now 2 people prophesying, 3 over here, 4 over there. Everybody prophesying, and we're not getting what's being said. It's all getting to be pretty mumbled up. For ye may all prophesy one by one, so that we can hear everybody concentrating on what we believe the Lord is saying. Verse 32. And the spirits of the prophets are subject to the prophets. What does that have to do with it? Timing is everything. Say it. Timing is everything. Timing is everything. Let me say it this way. You have a powerful word from God. You spoke it at the wrong time. Guess what? It ain't powerful no more. Because I have left the supernatural and now I'm looking at you that disrupted what was ever present. Got it? You don't properly, just like you don't correct someone that is in a poor condition. As a pastor, I had to learn that, okay? I had to put my brakes on. Because I was thinking about how I was going to rebuke you all night. All night. So when I see you in church Sunday morning, I have to say this to you. I'm going to have to say this to you. So when I come in, you already coming in crying. You're already coming in disturbed. You have a cast down look. What's going on? Now I got to listen to a 10-minute story now of your circumstances and situation. And I'm saying to the Lord, doggone it. I'm going to hold this hot potato a little bit longer. It's improper. It's improper. I'm not saying I always did that right. I did. I didn't care how you felt. In my younger days, just here you go. Seriously. Okay, I got what you're saying. We'll be praying for you. Listen, what I want to really talk to you about, man, how insensitive, and the Lord began to teach me, like it says about Jesus, he didn't break a reed. Which meant this, that he was powerful enough to turn tables over and whoop you on out the sanctuary. But the same Jesus was very sensitive and tender with humanity. He did not exploit the weak. So if you're weak, he wouldn't say, you little sissy, you, come on, man up. Got it? That's my colloquial terms for, okay, you got it now? All right. So timing is everything with prophecy. When the river is flowing, when the spirit wind is flowing, go with the wind. That's a good time. You look at leadership, it's all right, yeah, go, do it. Let us judge that. What will people think? Well, who cares? We ain't talking about man pleasing now. Obey the Lord. When the spirit flow with the spirit. That's why Paul had to put in scripture, grieve not the Holy Ghost. Why did he say that? Why did he say that? Disobedient saints not obeying the flow of the gifts of the Spirit. I think he was talking to some of us here. Don't you grieve the Holy Spirit. Don't put clamps on him. He wants to move. You keep that free willing spirit confined. Isn't that something? Isn't that something? I'm not saying that you have exclusive rights to do that. I'm not saying that. But at the time he wants to move, you don't move. He'll find somebody else, but you're already cramped in the sense his style. I'm amazed at God. I'm amazed that God would permit and allow mankind to hold him and to serve him or not. That's mind-boggling. I don't know about you. Are y'all understanding what I just said? The last verse as we conclude. For God is not the author of confusion, but of peace, as in all churches of the saints. He's a God of peace. He's a God of order. But he is a God of gifts. And those of us who are gifted, because you are filled with the Holy Ghost, we must then flow with those gifts. So stand as I bless you now with the word already served. Hallelujah. I declare over you right now, be filled with the Holy Spirit. concentrate on the Lord. Be filled with the Holy Ghost. Speaking in tongues as the Spirit gives utterance. Be filled now. Exercise your faith and receive the filling. Receive the infilling. Speaking in Tedah Shabaka. Come on, y'all, pray in the Holy Ghost right now. Help the atmosphere for those that need the baptism of the Holy Spirit. Be refilled even in the name of Jesus right now. Right now. Right now, where you are, right now. In Jesus' name, be filled. Be filled. Be filled with the Holy Ghost. Right now, in Jesus' name. Father, we thank you for your power. We thank you for your anointing, destroying every yoke. Heal and save now. And deliver. Oh God. Come on, pray in the Spirit now. Oh Rabakasa. Yay, God. Yay, God. We thank you for doing this for your people now. We thank you, Lord God, that their gifts are being stirred. I command your gifts to be stirred now. Let opportunities for this to happen. Let their faith arise to the occasion. Faith come by hearing, hearing by the words of God. Faith come by the praying in the Holy Ghost to build that faith level up where it needs to operate supernaturally in the name of Jesus. We call it so. We call it so. We call it so. And we call it done for everyone, for everyone, for everyone right now. In Jesus' name. And everyone said amen. Amen. Come on, give the Lord a hand. Praise the Lord. Please be seated. As we get ready to have communion, thank you all for viewing. As we get ready to sign you off, and certainly the information is on the screen how you can reach us. We want you to flow in the gifts of the Spirit, and we want you most of all to be saved. And if you're giving your life to the Lord, remember this: find you a good church home, one who is Bible-believing, Christ-centered, one that is filled with the Spirit, one that is kingdom advancing, right? With those in mind, you can never fail. And so we bless you today.